Welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast, the show about sparking and discovering endless possibilities where we work, live, and play. A safe place where we can help you peel back the cover to what may be blocking you from being your most authentic and happiest self.
Listen to our show today as we speak with Wendy Smith about both and thinking and how to transform tensions in our lives into opportunities for creativity, innovation, and personal growth. Wendy is a professor of management, the Women's Leadership Initiative faculty director at the Lerner College of Business and Economics at the University of Delaware, and a fellow at the Academy of Management. She earned her PhD in organizational behavior at Harvard Business School, where she began her intensive research on strategic paradoxes to help leaders and senior teams effectively respond to contradictory yet interdependent demands. Working with executives and scholars globally, she received the Web of Science Highly Cited Research Award 4 years in a row for being among the 1% most cited researchers in her field, and received the Decade Award from the Academy of Management Review for the most cited paper in the past 10 years. Wendy has taught at the University of Delaware, Harvard University, and the University of Pennsylvania at Wharton, while helping senior leaders and middle managers all over the world address issues of interpersonal dynamics, team performance, organizational change, and innovation. Her book, Both and Thinking, is published by Harvard Business Review and was #1 on the new release category on Amazon. Most recently, she and her co-author, Marianne Lewis, were also awarded the Thinkers 50 Breakthrough Idea Award for their work. Now enjoy the show. Wendy Smith, welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast. It's so exciting to see you. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me here, Darrin.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to dive into everything you're doing. In fact, congratulations about being nominated as part of the Thinkers 50. I know they're really rewarding folks that are changing how we think with management thinking and theory. Tell us about that. What's going on there?
Oh, thanks for raising that. Thinkers 50 is an amazing organization that brings together management thinkers around the world. They like to call themselves the Academy Awards of Management Thinkers. And it was a huge honor not only to be nominated, but to win this Breakthrough Thinking Award because, wow, what an incredible group of nominees who are doing amazing things around the world. And I am so grateful to be in a conversation and network of people that are really thinking about making a difference.
Congratulations. That's fantastic. And now I imagine it has something to do with your book and all the thinking that you're putting out in the world. What is that? Could you dive into that a little bit?
Sure. And I'll just say, as I said in this fun acceptance speech I got to give at Thinkers 50, my 10 minutes of fame, we won this Breakthrough Thinking Award. And the idea that is this breakthrough idea that we've been playing with, myself and my co-author, colleague, and friend, Marianne Lewis, for the last 25 years in our research, is this idea of living into the both and, which leans into, when we can play with this word and this concept, leans into the idea of navigating paradoxes. And as I said in this speech, this idea of paradox has been around for 2,500 years. And what is breakthrough, if anything, is that we are finally within the world of organizations and leadership and social science and groups and teams, recognizing just how paradoxical those spaces are and how we have to navigate them in this both and way.
That's super fun. 2,500 years. When did you get started? How did you get started and really get interested in this work?
Well, not 2,500 years ago, unless we go into a different belief about humankind. In some ways, we can talk about how we can track back this idea to so many strands in my youth. Intellectually, this started for me in my PhD. I was doing a PhD at Harvard Business School around innovation. How do companies and leaders in companies think about navigating, introducing, exploring, experimenting, trying new things, innovating for tomorrow, while simultaneously managing their existing world for today. And so much of the thinking and innovation was that they had to rip the Band-Aid, move forward quickly, otherwise they would get stuck in the inertia of today. But when I went out to explore this and I was studying the top management teams of strategic business units at IBM, that's not their reality. The reality was that they had to move quickly, experiment, not get stuck in the inertia of today, and they also had to manage their current customers and existing products for quite some time. They weren't just letting go of it. And so the real question was, how do they navigate both the today and the tomorrow simultaneously, the stability and the change. And that introduced to me this concept of, well, they're navigating paradox.
And how do they do that?
Whew, some of them not well. Some of them not well. I mean, Darrin, I think the first question is, why is it so hard, right? Why is this such a hard space? But also, what do we mean by paradox? And so like the first piece of why it's so hard is, or what do we mean? Let me just say one thing about what we mean and why it's so hard. What we mean by this word paradox is that underlying the challenges they face, what's so hard is that the today and the tomorrow are competitive in terms of they're in competition, they're in conflict over things like resources, who gets the engineers, and how do we allocate our money, and how do we structure our senior team, and do we make our roles aligned with the innovation in the existing product, and or do we have functions that are responsible for both, and how do we allocate our time, and so that's just like this ongoing conflict. And what we point to is that these dilemmas show up for us wanting us to make a decision. People really feel anxious when there is uncertainty. It feels like we're out of control. It feels like we don't know what's going on. And so we work to make that decision as quickly as possible. And then we get stuck in the decisions that we make. So we might work to say, we're going to move to the future, and I'm just going to avoid, prevent, limit my focus on the past, or I'm just stuck in the past and I can't even make time for the future. What we find, or what we argue, is that underlying all of those dilemmas that we face are these paradoxes. And when we say paradox, what we're talking about are these opposing forces, these tug of wars, these competing demands that are not only in conflict with each other, not only contradictory, they are also interdependent. They inform and define each other. And we see that in the world of, today and tomorrow. The today creates the resources that enables us to move to the tomorrow. The tomorrow creates the energy that allows us, so when today becomes tomorrow, we're still solvent and energized. And they're reinforcing. And we like to use the image of the yin yang, of the image of like, it's the black and white slivers that are both really oppositional, but also define, inform, and interface with one another in this mutually reinforcing way. And if we can see, if we can notice, if we can appreciate these paradoxes, not see it as a bad thing, but see it as just the way the world is that underlies all of our dilemmas, it changes the way that we can think about and respond to and approach the dilemma itself.
I appreciate you outlining that and sharing with our audience what that looks like. I feel like there is that sense of either or type of mentality we get stuck in, which seems like this is going to counter that. So why is that such a negative element to the either or that we're thinking about today? And how do we start to move forward with the both and? Because I think, like you set up, the paradox is quite important for us to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is noticing how often we experience our worlds, the tensions in our world, the dilemmas, the trade, like the way we experience it as an either or. That's the first step. And if I were to rename this book, the thing I've been thinking about in the last couple of weeks is, I think I would rename it. The book that we've captured so many of the ideas is called Both and Thinking. I think I would rename it to be, it's not an either or. And that phrase, I'm so thrilled to hear that come up more often. That's the starting point, is noticing how often the tensions that we face in our lives feel detrimental and feel like an either or that we have to choose between. And that could be so many things. So it could be, when I do workshops on this in companies and I ask them to tell me about a big tension they feel with their company, the number one that comes up is not the tension within the company, but the tension between work and life, right? The tension between being in our careers and everything we want to do with the rest of our lives. And that sometimes feels like an either or, because we have to make a choice between, am I spending my time right now doing my work, or am I spending my time right now with my family at the soccer game or at the dinner or at the whatever, or whatever, and my hobbies. So it feels like an either or. I mean, we can talk about so many. I know that a key piece that you think a lot about is issues of diversity. And gosh, those feel like a big either or, because it feels like it's a zero-sum game, that if we invite in more expansive voices of more expansive people, backgrounds, diverse backgrounds into the conversation, it feels like we're kicking people out. And that's, it's not an either or here, I'll give you another one in the diversity space. I hear a lot of, if we're going to invite in broader conversations around diversity and need to make change around that, do we need to change the people and the way that they think? Or do we need to change the system and the biases that are embedded in the system? Well, I mean, Darrin, it's not an either or, right? So if we can just start by noticing the tensions that we experience, notice how often we frame them as an either or, and then realize that that's actually detrimental. And we can talk more if you want about why, and the research about why the either or is so detrimental. But if we can notice that and switch, then we have much more opportunity.
Yeah, it's almost like conveniently we figure out, hey, we got to pick a side. We have to go this route. This is going to be easier. To your point, we have to get to a quick response or quick answer. And, we talk about being a good teammate at work, yet I want to have success individually. I want to grow. So there's kind of that, that contradiction as well. Yet I think it would be helpful for us to talk about a little bit more about the either or, as you mentioned.
And why it's so problematic. So in the book, we talk about the either or being limited at best and detrimental at worst. Limited in that it minimizes the possibilities of creative outcomes, detrimental in being that it's really problematic. And when we say that it's because this either or, because of our psychology, our sociology, it leads to these downward trending vicious cycles. And we point to 3 patterns of that. And so here's the 3 patterns very quickly. The first is that we pick a side, and then to some of your work, we get stuck. We call that the rabbit hole. And in part, we pick a side because, again, we feel this anxiety where there's uncertainty. We want clarity, so we pick a side. I like to say that if people don't believe that we want to quickly go to a decision, if we mentally bring ourselves back to March 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, where there was so much uncertainty, that uncertainty was consequential. We wanted clear answers to things that there were not clear answers for, like everything from, should I be washing my vegetables 3 times or 4 times? Like, should I be holding off my mail? Like, and we wanted that clarity because the outcomes were uncertain and it feels so anxiety provoking. So we pick a side. And then there's so much psychology that shows us how cognitively we want to stay committed to that side. We want consistency. And then we surround ourselves by people who reinforce our side. We surround ourselves by, so we call that the rabbit hole, because we just intensify one side. The second pattern is that once we pick a side, when things change around us and we need to change, we essentially shift completely. We overcorrect to the other side. We call that the wrecking ball. Right? We see companies doing this, right? We've gone down a side, we've stuck with a way of being, oh, we need to innovate, we're going to change everything. Or we're very team-oriented culture, everybody's going to work in teams. Well, we're all working in teams, no one's getting individual work done. Okay, we're going to shift to individual work. Like, we just overcorrect, and we call it the wrecking ball because it's, you can sort of imagine this swing from one side to the other. So that's number 2. And the third reason this is pernicious, and I think you were alluding to this earlier, is that the biggest problem with either oring, and we see this now in our incredibly polarized world, is that we pick a side and then we fail to value or appreciate that there's another side that's also legitimate. And we get stuck and we surround ourselves by the people and the structures and the point of view to defend our side, because we believe that one side has to be right and the other side has to be wrong. And so we call that trench warfare, because the image is that we dig a trench, digging, reinforcing our side with the people around us, the same, that support us. And we just shoot out at the other side, often dehumanizing them. And I say this with a lot of anxiety, heartache, because, and I think, by the way, we do that. We do that because as soon as we're triggered by fear and anxiety. And there's so much of that. We have to double down on being right about something, because that makes us sort of feel as if that, as opposed to sort of open up to the vulnerability and possibility that we just don't know, or that there's just complexity. That kind of complexity is hard for us to grasp when our brains go into that fear mode, right? So it is this highly polarized experience. And again, I say this with a lot of anxiety, because I think we see that in our world today. We see that in our organizations, where we pick a side and there's someone else pick a side, and then we're just in that constant combative. We see that in our partnerships. We see that in our national politics, where things don't move forward because we are so sure that we are right and they, which I put air quotes, like they are wrong. Darrin, we're seeing that in our global politics right now, and a lot of people are dying because there are multiple sides of conflict where both sides have legitimate, painful claims, but each side believes that they are the only ones with legitimacy in those painful claims. And it's really a heartache to see that. And I've been spending a lot of time recently talking to people about that. And it's hard. And it's hard for people to live into the complexity that there could be multiple sides with legitimacy in these kinds of geopolitics.
It's scary to think about, in the far-reaching impacts, as you mentioned, with warfare, on senseless acts of killings, and people just defending a position, even in the workplace. So, my heart goes out to everybody that's feeling this directly with loss, even the loss of possibilities, or wherever that might be, in forms of life or opportunities, or being seen as someone that's capable of doing certain things. To go to a personal level for a minute,
Yeah,
Wendy, I have to say,
I'm dark, but I think the point is, Darrin, and we can go to the personal level. I think that the key here is that this both and helps us, with our individual decisions, but it also has a huge impact on our sort of global outlook. And it's both. Yeah.
It's absolutely both. And what I mean by personal level too, is just what you're saying is really resonated with me, because I went through this big awakening like 7 years ago, and the logo of the show on my book, the logo I talk about, this one-eyed smile, is different. And over 7 years ago, I noticed that I was swimming in that bubble, the round circle. That one little circle was a bubble of sameness.
Yeah.
And part of the story is when I started to realize that it wasn't my fault, where we've been pushing away each other, pushing away possibilities and the biases that I had, but it was my responsibility. So it was that paradox. I needed to recognize it wasn't my fault, yet I needed to recognize that I was hurting people based on who I was in the position I was in, and I needed to expand. So that smile is me expanding out to the world. So I got out of my bubble of sameness, and I invited the world in differently. I welcomed indifferences. That's that other paradox that really woke me up to say, wait, we can coexist, and there are better opportunities when we actually bring differences, and it creates new discoveries. And my best successes and the most success I've been in with different organizations is when we've actually welcomed in people with different backgrounds, different skills and experiences. Because I'll admit, I was hiring people that were just like me. It wasn't bad. It wasn't amazing, because when I started to hire differently, and I started to make a different path, I started to see the possibilities. I started to see the joy, which is why this podcast exists. This is why that one-eyed smile exists, because I had to get out of my bubble of sameness. When I started to do that, literally the expansion is me inviting the world in. I got so much joy out of it. So what you're saying, it personally resonates with me. And I didn't realize I was actually living in this world of paradox and both and until we started talking.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. What resonates for me is, so I teach a women's leadership course through the university. And one of the things that was really poignant to me, we speak a lot about diversity. And what strikes me is that one of the reasons it's hard for people to, as you say, invite in difference is because it feels threatening to our own identities. And yet, I love the story of a woman who came to us and said, I did not know how to interact with people different than me. I was scared, and I thought I would lose a sense of self. I thought I would lose my identity. This was a woman of color who was so proud of being a woman of color legitimately, but was afraid to interact with people, or not, like it just didn't resonate, in part because what if that meant that she lost who she was and what she identified with? And yet talked about how being in conversation, developing strong ties, making friends, developing trust with people who were different than her, with men, with people, with white people, with people that, you know, were not from the United States, but were from outside, because this was a woman from the United States, how those differences only made salient, increasingly made salient, not only enabled her to delve even deeper into who she was. The ironic effects, and this is what we see with paradox, is that engaging with the opposite shines a light on and enables what you're like the one pole by engaging with the other, that by engaging with difference, we can actually value what's unique about and distinct about us rather than lose that sense of it.
Because that's exactly how I felt.
Yeah.
I recognized that I wasn't being my authentic self, and I was pushing away my uniqueness because I felt like I needed to fit into this club, if you will, based on what I looked like or the jobs I had. And when I shook that, I recognized I am different. I even use a pink pen to be different, to recognize this every day. That's kind of my accountability reminder. So I appreciate what you're saying. I was afraid what I was going to give up. And then when I did give it up, I actually got a lot more. And is that okay when you think about the both and? Because some folks will challenge me on that, to say, if we give more of the world, I'm not expecting things back. It just happens.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that the amazing piece, which is that we can let go of expectations, and then the things that we want come to us even more? That's that's a leap of faith. We don't use the language of a leap of faith, but we do use the language of serendipity and possibility emerging over time that we don't even expect. You know, I'm a big fan of Christian Bush's work, The Serendipity Mindset, and the ways in which we create the structures in our lives, and we create the conditions to enable possibility to emerge that we don't know, the serendipity, as he talks about, the luck to come to us. And there it is.
It's interesting when you talk about luck, because I feel like, and you've probably seen the studies around creativity as well. You know, folks might say things happen to certain people for certain reasons, or, wow, they're so creative and I'm not. A lot of people think they're not creative. And in fact, there's studies that'll kind of prove that, you know, only 2% of adults actually have the ability to be creative, which is super scary. So I don't know if you've seen that study. Yeah, it's pretty wild. And I know your work, and Amy Edmondson says this in your book, which I love. She talks about the work you're doing. You know, it's a wellspring of creativity and possibility. And I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit more too, because I think creativity is what's lacking, in that ability to see what is there or could be there. Because I look at this as well as having faith. Maybe it's a belief with trust will get us to this place that you're talking about, that faith about that. If you pursue this with a higher purpose and a higher meaning, we will get there.
Yeah. There's a great book that we love by a psychologist, Albert Rothenberg. It's called The Emerging Goddess. And he talks about Janusian thinking, the Roman god Janus that's two-headed. And what he did was he went back looking at the diaries, letters, correspondence, just threads of insight from geniuses, people like Einstein and Mozart, Virginia Woolf as the writer, and said, well, what had enabled that kind of genius, that kind of novel ideas? And what he finds is that these genius ideas emerge when these people were able to sit with, to juxtapose opposing ideas and then sit with it and enable it to sort of bubble up into something new. So for Einstein, the theory of relativity comes from asking the question, how is it that an object can be both in motion and at rest at the same time? You know, and Picasso's art is about the integration of the dark and the light. And Virginia Woolf's writing is about understanding the juxtaposition of life, possibility, and the juxtaposed against death. And, you know, and that's an interesting juxtaposition. I mean, I was just listening to a podcast this morning reminding us that we know that some of the people that are most grateful for what we have offered to us in life are the ones that are confronting their death. And so what's that juxtaposition there that enables that? So Rothenberg explores that one possibility that emerges when we juxtapose opposing ideas and invite ourselves into the question, how can they coexist? How can they simultaneously occur? Is this creative? This creative integration, we call that creative integration. We use the image of the mule because the mule is the oldest living hybrid that we've been breeding for 3,000 years. It is smarter than the donkey, faster than the smarter than the horse, faster than the donkey. Bring them together, and you've got the mule. And so that is one approach or one outcome of both anding. It's not the only one, but it's one.
Yeah. So how did you come up with that related to the mule? What type of aha or what type of moment occurred?
Well, I will actually say that what was the bigger aha. So for us, this idea that both and can lead to like this creative integration.
Yeah.
That's been sort of an emergent. So again, people like Rothenberg, and Rothenberg wrote this book years ago, this Janusian thinking, this both like that aha, I think has been a really fantastic insight. And actually we have colleagues, our colleague Ella Marone-Spector in INSEAD has been doing a ton of work on creativity. And what she finds is that just changing the questions that people ask, moving them away from asking questions that are either or questions and into the both and, changing those questions, that surfaces much more creative outcomes than people who frame their questions as an either or. So there's a whole lot of research that supports this idea. We see this. The bigger aha for us actually was that I went into research thinking that if you framed a both and, you'd come up with this creative integration. And sometimes we do. And more often we don't. So when I went into IBM and I was like, oh, the people that you asked this question, how do they do it well? Well, the teams, the leaders that do this both and between today and tomorrow, they should be coming up with all these creative ideas of how to bring together their innovation with their existing product. And there it is. And that happened sometimes. But more often, it didn't happen. More often, instead, what we found is the metaphor we use, or what we label as being consistently inconsistent, or the metaphor of a tightrope walker. And what we mean by that is that what we found at IBM is that in order to live into the both and over time, and that's the key point, it's over time, they are making decisions. Those decisions are sometimes they're supporting the existing product. So they're putting more resources into the existing product. They're making other decisions where they're putting more resources into the innovation, but they are making these micro shifts, micro oscillations between supporting both of these over time. They're not over deciding to focus on the existing product that they get stuck in the inertia. They're not over deciding to focus on the innovation that they lose any sense of their existing world and their current customers. They're making these micro shifts. And we use this metaphor of the tightrope walker because essentially the tightrope walker isn't standing still. They're not waffling in the both and. They're not falling off the tightrope by focusing too much on one side or the other, but to get to the other side, to focus on the long-term vision over time, they're making these sort of micro oscillations on the tightrope they're never balanced. They're not stuck in a balance. They are balancing, micro shifting over time.
I almost see them holding this long pole as you're describing it, as if like they're holding the business in their hand to kind of, but yet move forward as you're describing it. So it's so interesting. So how do you engage a leader to really go through these steps and these small steps, and how do you engage both and thinking?
Yeah, question. Such a good question. I mean, Darrin, I think that there's a couple of different ways to answer that. The first is, does the leader see the tensions that they're experiencing? One thing that I have found over the last 20, 25 years is that increasingly leaders are A, experiencing tensions, and B, recognizing that they have to move beyond their either or. So when I started this work in my doctoral work, so many people told me, don't go there. Paradox is not a concept for organizations and leaders. And those real people out there, because that's what academics call leaders and people that do the work that we study, those real people, they won't get it. And in the last 20, 25 years, the language has shifted significantly. We have colleagues at Oxford University, Michael Smets, Tim Morris, and others that worked with the search firm Heinrich and Struggles, and they came up with something called, and they what they did was that they interviewed something like 170 CEOs around the world and asked what are the challenges that they are facing now. And they came up with something that's called the CEO report. So you can download the CEO report looking at the Oxford website. And the key aha from this was that leaders are facing more and more complex tensions, and they are understanding or framing them in the language of paradoxes, that they cannot make a decision between today and tomorrow, or between being global and being local, or between focusing on the markets and their profits and their business and addressing issues of sustainability and the broader mission, or focusing on their outcomes and their customers and focusing on their employees. It's not a decision between the two. They have to live into both of them. And so the aha of this CEO report is that leaders get that challenge more and more now, and are using this language of, gosh, we need to live into the both, and how do we do it?
I imagine leaders, and I've seen some leaders get creative about how they go about balancing sustainability, balancing their people, and maintaining, call it profits, to be able to exist for the long term, continue to innovate and reinvest for the longevity of not only the business, but the services they're providing. So I think it's so important. I'm glad to hear that.
And to your work, increasingly recognizing that if we're going to be effective for our customers, the first thing we have to do is support our employees. Happier employees, more engaged employees, more productive employees that feel like they belong. They're the ones that are going to go out and really, support the business, sell it to the customer, compared to the ones that are, there and told just make the customer happy at all costs, right? And so we see that as well.
Yeah, it's a cause and effect. I believe when we really reinforce the people aspect of this, that people want to do things differently, show up, maybe employ some of the both ands, step into these paradoxes. And I think that's where, opportunities really coexist for everybody. And I think people could take off. Now, was our mutual friend Jane Dutton influential in any of your thinking or your path?
So I'll give a huge shout out to Jane Dutton, professor of management at the University of Michigan. Jane was and continues to be a huge mentor of mine in so many ways in academia, as she is to so many people, as many people listening might know or listen to your podcast with her. Jane launched the Positive Organizational Scholarship community, but more importantly, she has been both a role model of what it means to be a compassionate, engaged scholar, and a advisor to me on how to think about what the value of research is, how to engage with research, how to engage in community. As a scholar, scholarship and academia can feel really lonely and really competitive. And Jane, our mutual friend, has redefined scholarship as a communal, integrative activity that is all about living into our vulnerabilities and connecting with people. And I am so grateful to her on so many levels for the ways in which I have leaned into and sought her advice and been the beneficiary of her wisdom and compassion.
Yeah, you're both incredible, and your vulnerability to go into that level of research where, like you said, some folks might be saying that doesn't exist or we don't need that here. When you think about positivity or, the both and thinking or compassion in the workplace, or really, quite honestly, is loving other human beings so we can bring out the best in different ways. So I applaud you and Jane.
Darrin, I want to just pause for a second, because I also want to give a shout out. Jane started Positive Organizational Scholarship along with two other scholars that are also worthy of mention, Kim Cameron and Bob Quinn at the University of Michigan. Kim and Bob were some of the early scholars that wrote about this idea of paradox in organizational scholarship. We won this breakthrough award. If I am grateful for anything, it's to stand on the shoulders of giants like Kim and Bob, whose competing values framework leans into competing ideas, competing values as a way of navigating culture, whose work about leadership is about leaning into different and opposing leadership styles at the same time, who edited the volume Paradox and Transformation way back when. And so Marianne and I have leaned into an early conversation that they started and have built on and expanded it. And we now have a global community of hundreds of scholars studying this idea of paradox that I was told is never going to go anywhere in organizational leadership. It's gone places, but Kim and Bob were also hugely influential, and I want to give them a shout out too.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing that. They are quite amazing. And, they're hands-on, and they're like Jane, where they want to help anyone that is interested in this work, that wants to put this into play at work or in the communities or the world with different leaders. I personally have met each of them, at the Positive Business Conference. I can imagine you being an amazing speaker there as they were, and sitting in their classrooms in these subgroups of conversations with Jane and Kim and Bob. And you're right. They're personable, yet they're giants and leaders of their craft. And I am overwhelmed with how much amazing research and execution that's now out in the world with positive businesses, where people are actually taking seriously by putting positivity in the workplace. So I appreciate you mentioning them. They're quite amazing.
Darrin, I'm so grateful for you to say that, because as scholars, you sometimes sit behind the ivory tower and say, like, what's going to happen with this research? And it's people like you who are engaged in this conversation that say, hey, this research is valuable. It's interesting. And it's interesting and it's valuable. It will make a difference. And let's figure out how to take it and bring it into the workplace. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And when I was at, Mass Mutual, that's when I actually went out to the conference. I actually went out to meet Mindy Cox, who I want to introduce you to, from OC Tanner. They have a tagline, is to help people thrive at work. The Positive Business Conference, it is what it says. And I brought that back to Mass Mutual, saying, this is possible. To your point about bringing it back to the workplace, and then getting leaders on board to walk the talk, and then to reinforce it, and then to teach and to help others to step in a safe environment, to be able to actually then do the work and be courageous, be vulnerable. That's where change really lights everybody up, and then results follow. And I think a lot of folks will challenge this work to be, are we going to see outcomes, or we're going to see results? Absolutely. I've seen it in a lot of the research that I've done and the research you've done. Is there anything you could share related to that?
Well, I was going to ask you the same. What's your aha there? And I mean, yeah, what's your aha?
I appreciate you asking. With Mass Mutual, we at first weren't sure it was going to change our culture. We thought it was going to be kind of a flavor of the month, so to speak. And then we really had to dig in and commit to this. And we actually went from a third quartile rating in our culture scores up to a top decile within 12 months. We were at it for a couple of years until we changed course about our thinking and our approach. This is after going to the Positive Business Conference, learning from Jane directly and others, and just said we needed to step in differently. We needed to really care for people. We needed to have empathy. When we asked questions, when we asked for involvement, we had to be serious, and we had to reinforce it, that we wanted folks to come up with the ideas, to implement different actions. And not only did our survey of culture scores improve, we actually doubled our financial results. We became number one in certain markets as far as financial wellness. Our net promoter scores were top quartile. So guess what happens? It's cause and effect again. People improves processes and deliveries and experiences where customers are delighted, and you have more financial outcomes as well. So it's proven. And there's another quick example. I actually have a podcast that we talked to a hospital about their transformation, where they shifted their focus on patient care to patient caregiving, meaning the folks that are taking care of the patients, and they transformed all the numbers. They ended up being a top decile hospital in patient safety. They ended up creating a whole new mantra around thriving in the workplace, and people stepping in and having the answers and leading the way. They're transforming how hospitals are being run today. Like their burnout rates are lower. Their nursing shortages are no longer there. So all the things you can imagine that go with healthcare these days. So I appreciate you asking. It's real. So the work you're doing, and Jane and others, it's impactful. So thank you. And I really want to make sure you're continuing to put that out in the world. You just won the Thinkers 50. So it's well beyond me, but anybody that's listening should gravitate, grab your book. It's quite special. And I did notice that, and I'll put a link on the show too. There's a guide you have on the website, a guide of some questions, some areas that you've talked about on the show that I think can reinforce the thinking. And it's straightforward. I think it could be implemented in any part of your day, especially in the workplace or the communities. But there are areas where we could just simply practice.
Yeah, for
How
sure.
about you? How about what other results have you seen?
Well, I'm so grateful for you to mention those results. One of the things that's sort of surprising to me is that we know we have these great examples, these great, we have this incredible research where we find that there are some simple practices like how to enable people to be more inclusive, how to enable people to show up more fully, how to create voice, how to create, to Amy Edmondson's term, psychological safety, how to innate, how to focus on our employees. And yet and that people don't do them. They don't do them. Right. And I think that part of that, I just a couple of weeks ago did a dinner roundtable for a group of CFOs. And we were talking about, well, what would it look like to both, to lean into some of these kinds of practices? And they very quickly, because their CFOs went to, well, we got to do a risk assessment and we've got to be able to show the outcomes and we've got to be able, and they were very clear. We got to show the outcomes. We got to show the short-term outcomes. We all know that none of that is like really that predictable, but we got to show it anyway. And, I think that there is a way in which we have constructed our organizations with this short-term outcomes, short-term rewards, risk management. That's again, it goes a function back to our fears, our anxieties, our worries, and then our collective worries that we build into our systems. And I just at Thinkers 50, I was thrilled to have some time to hang out with Andrew Winston. Andrew is the co-author with Paul Pullman on their book Net Positive. Paul Pullman is the CEO, or was the CEO, of Unilever for about 10 years, introducing the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, really with a focus on shifting or enabling financial performance through a commitment to sustainable practices, employee practices. And Paul Pullman was famous as a, listed company for saying to investors, I'm not going to offer up short-term quarterly reports anymore, quarterly earnings, because that kind of structure just reinforces our short-term thinking, our anxiety, our fears. Like that's not going to enable us to take risks, to put aside our fears and to try things that we know are valuable, but that just take longer to marinate and that we cannot demonstrate immediately with so I think there's something about our structures that reinforce that, and about the courage of our CEOs and our leaders and ourselves to have the faith to let go of that anxiety and live into something that we know works, but we just aren't able to demonstrate on a spreadsheet in quite the way that people want to do so.
Yeah, good examples. Like the stock companies, to your point, have those quarterly calls and they have to hit the numbers or else something poor happens to the stocks, right? The stock prices. And I think you're right. There's that element of long-term thinking, kind of believing, stepping into that belief differently about our people, or what the priorities really are, like that balance of whatever is important to us today: sustainability, diversity and inclusion, helping people belong and feel like they're seen and valued. I mean, when people feel valued, like people step in differently, and they do amazing things. And that's something I have personally had to overcome. When I recognize that anything is possible for people will surprise you in ways you can never imagine. And that's really what woke me up. And, some people will hear the word woke and they'll be like, oh, he said woke. It's okay. We have to stop and listen to the words that are stopping us from actually making progress, whatever that might be, and really use that both ends. And to your point about CFOs, when I talk about people first, I usually get, well, what does that mean? This isn't a playground. It's like, no, back to your both and, like focusing on people and getting tremendous business outcomes. Oh, it's absolutely possible. And you could show people how. It's just stepping into that thinking. I think we kind of go back to what we always think about: people first means we're giving away the store. The difference of kind and nice and those type of things. Can I love someone in the workplace? Yeah, I love people. I love human beings. If we start to think about both our minds and our heart together, people start to feel that. They feel the authenticity to what you mentioned before.
A couple of years ago, my kids' school, so I have 3 kids, and at 2 of them are at a school that was reading a book that the head of the school shared with me, and I loved it. And essentially, it was making this argument that one of the issues about performance at school is that kids who perform feel like they really belong. This is like their place. But that in order to perform, we have to sort of shift that relationship. It's not that you need to perform in order to feel like you belong, but in order to perform, in order to succeed, you first need to belong. I belong here. And that is going to be what's enabling our success. And the same is true in the workplace, that in the workplace, you come from financial institutions, like the superstars. It's like, this is my place. And everybody else is like, am I the imposter? The more that we can enable people to feel like this is their place and they belong and their voice is valued and their contributions and talents are valued, the more that they will grow and contribute and succeed. So let's look at belonging not as you said, a woke thing, but as something that enables that success rather than something that is a function of or comes after or, responsive to that success.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. And there's a lot of companies that have D, I, E, and B at the end. And I think you just said this, and this is a belief I have, is that the B should be first. Because as we welcome people into businesses, like you said, people feel part of the team. You pick a sport team, pick whatever it is that's important to you as an audience member here. Imagine someone coming in feeling on the outside for 6 months, for a year, maybe the whole time, and not being able to be their true self or full self. Are they going to perform to the best of their ability, or do things that you thought might have been impossible in the past? No, I think the belonging piece, you're spot on. I think if we could welcome people in a different way where they're seen, and then people will start to kind of understand, hey, I can contribute in that level of psychological safety. And then I could actually then get valued for who I really am. And then it just continues to morph into amazing possibilities for individuals, teams, and organizations. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Here's the thought experiment that I do with my class around this for that point, because I think when it comes to feeling included or feeling like I belong, I think we all of us ask these questions as we enter into new institutions. Do I belong here? No matter who we are. Yeah. And it might be that there's different degrees of this depending on our social identities. And I don't want to diminish that. And I invite my students or I invite my executives to take a pause and say, what did it feel like for you to enter into a new space? How did you feel about it? Were you sure? Some people, yeah, like a lot of swagger and confidence, but that is very few. For the most part, everybody has a story of looking around and saying, am I supposed to be here? Do I belong here? Is that sense of imposter syndrome. And the question is, what did that feel like? And what were you like? What was the implications for how you could show up? Because most of the time, if we're sitting there asking the question, like, do I belong here? Am I supposed to be here? Then we're saying, wait, should I say this? Should I do this? Should I act this way? But if we feel like, gosh, this is my home or this is my place, then it's like, I'm going to jump in and take action and feel engaged. And then my actions change. And so I think the key sort of thought experiment is to realize that, number one, we all walk into institutions and ask questions about our belonging. And number two, the quicker we can get over that, and I don't mean get over it like just get over it. I mean, like, the quicker we can create the conditions for each other where we enable ourselves to say, this is all of our place, we all belong, the more that people are going to be able to bring their best self, bring their whole self, and advance and create great things. So
it's so true. Because I also say that if we are comfortable with ourselves, then we could be ourselves. You're not wasting time trying to be somebody else.
Yeah.
And you're able to really create based on where you come from.
That's a little bit of a both and between the work that we do internally to bring ourselves to a space and the work that happens in the is that, so people will ask, is that about who you are or is that about the space you're entering into? And it's both. That is a both and of both. It's both who we are and the space, because even the most confident people could walk into spaces that are really precarious or really nerve-wracking or really high status or, competitive and sort of feel off kilter, right? So, even even the people that you look at and like, oh, this person's really made it. And you ask them, they will tell you that there are spaces they walk into and don't feel like they belong. And so it's both. It's both who we are as individuals and it's the spaces we create.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I need to ask, because you mentioned this as well in the beginning about the both and how you got to this place, and you mentioned there are some lines back to your childhood. Is there anything that you recall that maybe is kind of showing up for you today, or maybe like lit a fire for you, or was a light that you go back to?
One of the things that so one of my advisors was Richard Hackman, who did some great work on groups and teams, and he was the first to say a line that I think is used often, that research is me search. And so we repeat that at the beginning of our book. We say research is we search. That certainly so much of leaning into this both and was about so much of my own either oring, and whether it was either oring about my career, what did I want to be? I spent a lot of time thinking about, do I really want to be an academic? Because academics just think about ideas, they don't make impact on the world. But then if I go out into the real world, am I really going to like be able to bring deep and important ideas? Do I when I started studying in my PhD, do I really want to be studying innovation? Is that really as impactful? But then, so I went, but I really want to be studying social responsibility. But am I going to be able to ever get a job with that? I spent a lot of time either oring in my own life that has triggered an exploration into, is there an alternative and what could that look like?
Yeah, but like if you go back to your fifth grade self, did you have a dream of what you wanted to be?
I don't know.
Or were you either oriented back then, going back and forth about different options? I think we typically might.
Yeah. I think my fifth grade self was too busy trying to figure out fifth grade.
That's great.
What to do then. I spent a lot of time in high school as in a youth group where I did a lot of leadership work. And so I think that the question of what the value of leadership and how it can really make a difference to bring people together and make stuff happen was something that I saw and I experienced. And the idea of whether to study this phenomena or to be this phenomena certainly came up. But I spent a lot of time in high school engaged in and really valuing what leadership means.
Now, as we think about sparking possibilities for people that are listening and taking that forward to help others bring out their potential and their opportunities, and doing this without the fear of giving something up or self-preservation, yet to really do better for others. Because I believe everybody's possible. I think there's an element that if we could all lean in and help each other, we're all going to get better. And I'm just curious, is there something that maybe you haven't said, or maybe you want to reinforce, that you could help our audience kind of leave with today to really start to think about how they can not only live their possible, yet help others too?
Yeah. As you were saying that, I think, and maybe I'll offer two quick thoughts. The first is empathetically, I want to say that this isn't easy. And it's not easy because somebody the other day said, oh, isn't the both and the easy way out? It's sort of like the middle ground. And no, the both and is really leaning into and acknowledging that there are different and opposing points of view, that we don't have that we can live into the uncertainty, that we can live into the vulnerability. So we talk about the importance of, or the recognition of the discomfort. We don't want to sweep that under the rug. We want to acknowledge it, because it's in acknowledging it that we can get to not letting it define our actions. So we talk about finding comfort in the discomfort and the empathy that it's not easy, that it triggers our fears and our anxieties and our defensiveness. So that's one. And maybe the second is, I'll just leave it on a more hopeful piece, which is that people say, okay, I get it. This both and is valuable. What do I do? And so we read a whole book about what to do. So, there's a whole book of suggestions. And the first step into it, we would say, is just, and we sort of touched on this earlier, but I'll just emphasize it, is noticing how often we frame our challenges as either ors and change the question. Because just reframing the question invites us into a new way of thinking, or at least the starting point of a new way of thinking. So if it seems complicated or complex, the first step, if you will, the first invitation is to change the question.
Wendy, you are making a huge impact in the world. You're both and thinking, how you're presenting yourself in your courageous ways, and congrats on the awards you've been given. You deserve every one that you get and the ones ahead. And I hope to see you on the road and possibly at a conference one day, maybe at the Positive Business Conference in 2024. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah, I'm in awe with your work. I think living in awe with wonderment is something that allows us to kind of open our minds differently. And you're doing that, for me, and I hope many of the folks that are listening today. So I'm grateful and I'm honored that you're on the show, and, thanks for everything.
Thank you, Darrin. And thank you for the work that you are doing to take these ideas and make them possible, to live our possible.
I could sit in a coffee shop with Wendy all day to learn from her research, ideas, and her thinking. Her work is making far-reaching impacts and making vibrant realities possible worldwide. Ironically, Wendy's breakthrough thinking has been around for over 2,500 years. However, leaders and humans around the world are calling for change, and her ideas are one of the answers to the call. Join me in taking on our challenge to change the question from either or to both and our decisions and actions starting today. We discussed the many benefits, including improving work conditions, creating more remarkable business outcomes, helping people belong and thrive, welcoming differences as opportunities to discover, and replacing fear of the unknown with faith in the possibilities. Take time to delve into her teaching and practices with open-minded curiosity and wonder to inspire you and those you care for to reconnect with your happy, authentic selves and live your possible.
That's all for today's episode. If you liked the show, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Live Your Possible dares to unlock your fullest potential and become an avenue for others to do the same. Join the community by visiting ignitehappy.com. It's time to discover endless possibilities with equal opportunity for all. See you again next week for more insights on how you can live your possible.